and welcome to Audio Diaries. I'm Ralph Van Dyke, founding creative director of audio specialist agency Eardrum. At a time when some commentators are saying we've reached peak screen, with more and more consumers choosing to get their news and their entertainment through their ears. Today's guest is an important marketer working on the most important meal of the day. His name is Dan Bitti, and he's the senior marketing manager at Kelloggs, leading their breakfast portfolio.
Yeah, that's correct.
Good, right, got that. My research department has been stellar. I guess the first question I want to ask you is, with audiences growing on so many different audio platforms now, there's streaming and smart speakers and podcasting. Does that present Kellogg's with some other opportunities, some new opportunities in your eyes?
Yeah, Ralph, I think we've got brands like Nutrigrain, which have a predominantly teen audience. So a platform like Spotify is a perfect environment for the brand to play a role. And that's where audio branding plays such a key piece, that if you can build your brand and have assets that sit within your brand that are easily recognisable, the effectiveness of them on those channels is so powerful.
Can you tell us a little bit about the history of, say, the Nutrigrain Ironman audio logo? And I'll just play a little to remind everyone of what that sound is. Crush it.
It's definitely a piece of communications that ultimately became iconic. I probably can't take the credit for this work that's being done at the moment, but the Ehrenberg Bass Institute have a professor, Jenny Romanick, and she did a piece of work around distinctive brand assets. And a lot of brands all over the globe are having a look at this piece of work at the moment, particularly across big global brands. And whether it's a visual identifier or a logo, and in some cases an audio identifier. They're these assets that are really intrinsic to the brand that a consumer resonates with and can basically tell that it comes from that place or that brand through that asset. There's not a lot of brands that have big audio identifiers that have been used consistently over time, but Nutrigrain happened to have three that, when we spoke to consumers that had engaged with the brand through different generations, whether it was 70s, 80s, 90s, and today, there were elements of the brand that really rang true. And we've got three really distinctive assets that are audio identifiers, and one of them is called the Nutrigrain Slam, which you heard in that piece of audio before. Which
massive iron door slamming.
That's right. So we call it the Nutrigrain Slam because it is just, that big iron sound clunking on the screen. And it normally used to work as we built text onto the screen, and it always landed in ads through the late 80s, early 90s. Yep. And then there's the Nutrigrain Raw, which was kind of a signal of whoever the main talent on the TVC was overcoming whatever obstacle was in the TVC. And then the mechanical music that actually rang behind it was quite unique and different. So you didn't hear that sort of sound consistently across other communications. So it became something that was quite distinctive to the Nutrigrain brand, and in particular within something that pulled us apart within the categories that we played in. So when those three came back, the team was reviewing a lot of the work that had been in market over the last few years and realised that those assets actually weren't being used. So when they were reintegrated back into the piece of communication in early 2018, we saw a significant uptick in terms of recognition, association, and it really helped people understand, who the brand was and identify where the brand was coming from.
And I think it's actually a trick that isn't used too much or used enough, which is the visual transference, to use the same soundtrack, the same voice, and obviously the mnemonic in an audio-only setting. It just conjures all those visuals up, and you have an extremely cost-effective TV campaign in people's heads.
There's other brands out there that have been doing this for years, and I mean, you think about the old jingle. The jingle is kind of the best case in it, where brands had the sign-off mnemonic.
Kellogg's have had some quite famous jingles in the past, like there's the just like a chocolate milkshake, only crunchy.
It's just like a chocolate milkshake, only crunchy.
The actual line of just like a chocolate milkshake, only crunchy, it was used in text as a sign-off on the front of pack. Still is today. It's a sign-off of our communication on our TV.
Yeah, but you can hear it. When you see the words, you hear the phrasing of that tune. That is what's playing in your head when you read the words.
And it works no differently in communications for brands, that if you can have a sound that is associated back with your brand, it becomes something that's distinctive that you don't need to show a visual with it. I think we focus so much on make the logo the same size and in the same shape, and then we forget about the 5 different senses that we've got that we can trigger something in an auditory way. And the one part of the message that's actually cutting through is the audio. I'm not watching the TV, so therefore I'm not taking out the message that's visually being communicated to me. But what I do hear is the message from the brand, if the distinctive asset is strong enough.
Yeah.
And I think that's where, the jingle that plays over a Toyota ad, the brand that it's coming from, whether or not you see the visual that's on screen.
Do you find that brands have lacked that consistency of late?
With any time in any business where there's a new marketing lead or a new director or a CMO comes in, there has to be change. And with change comes the loss of a lot of these assets that you've built in the minds of consumers. So
it can be a challenge when you, like you said, with new marketers coming in, but also new agencies wanting to make their mark on a piece of work or a brand. But there's still plenty of scope, even with the same consistent assets. It's not held some of the biggest brands in the world back from doing amazing work, just maintaining what makes them distinctive and recognizable, but still finding a new way to tell the story. Now, previously you've worked for Unilever and Diageo on some pretty iconic brands. Are there any notable examples of from those brands that have benefited from utilizing audio assets?
Magnum is probably the one that rings most true to me. I worked on the ice cream portfolio for a long period of time. But one of the things that was an identifier for Magnum was the crack of the chocolate when whoever the talent in the TVC would bite into the Magnum ice cream for the first time. That became so iconic that you could hear that sound and you knew it was the sound of a Magnum cracking, and it signalled the memory structures of consumers and knowing that they knew what brand they were talking about or listening to, but it also was a signal of quality of the sound.
Let's just have a listen to that sound now. And there's also all the research about the way sound enhances flavour. I mean, you've got Heston Blumenthal playing sea sounds and waves and things whilst serving seafood, but all the research that's been done, Charles Spence at Cambridge University did a lot of really interesting studies about how we prefer higher pitch sounds if we want to communicate freshness. And that cracking noise has now been taken into the tubs. I understand you've got crackable tubs where you squeeze the sides of the little containers and it cracks. You can feel it in your hand before you rip into it, and then on the top there's a top layer as well. I'm salivating as I say this.
Yes, I mean it's great to see that the team still continues to use that such iconic sound with that, even as it moves into a different format.
Outside of the brands you're working on, what are some of the Australian brands you admire in terms of the way they've used audio as part of their arsenal for their marketing?
I think Sportsbet's done a really good use of having that really consistent voice that sits over all of their communications.
It's instant.
No matter what channel that it run on, whether it's on radio or it runs across any of the sports channels or mainstream TV, you definitely know it's a Sportsbet ad when you hear it.
Same race multi, new from Sportsbet.
Yeah, and it's got that very fast recognition. I mean, it allows them to use much shorter ad lengths.
Yeah, it's got a really distinctive voice to it as well. Like this, where a lot of brands fall into the trap is they go get the radio voice and they put that over the top, and it becomes quite generic and nothing that is anything at all distinctive about it, but delivers the message that they need to deliver. Yeah,
it's purely making the words audible at that point. They're not not bringing the words to life at all. And do you have any advice then for other marketers in terms of being able to use sound and make the most of some of the new opportunities and new platforms, audio platforms that are existing? What advice would you give to other people in your situation?
The biggest piece of advice I can give in regards to audio branding is to not leave it to the last thing or have it as the last thought. I think that's the trap that most marketers who don't think about audio, it becomes a throwaway thing or something that you need to do at the end of developing communications, whether that's what track am I going to put over the top of it, or what music am I going to use, or the sound effects that we're going to be putting over, and the sound design and the mix, and it's all done at the last stage of creating an ad. rather than thinking about it in the early stages of the creative development around how you can use audio to better communicate your overall message. And that may be, using a distinctive voice or using a particular type of music or, popular music, for instance. If you're working on a brand that's been in culture for a really long time, have a look back over history and see if there's defining assets that haven't been used and dig them out of the archives, because I think there might be things that you'll be able to bring back and bring to life these emotional connections or these connections that you have got with consumers that have laid dormant for many years.
Yep, and Nutrigrain proves that it works.
Oh, totally. I think it's a really great lesson in being able to go back through the history of a brand and know that there's things that really do connect with consumers that you can bring back and still resonate today.
Thanks, Dan. That was great. Thank you for your insights. It was awesome.
Thanks, Ralph. Thanks for having me.
And my thanks again to Dan Bitti for being a part of this audio diary. And if you'd like help creating, maintaining, or even reviving an audio asset for your brand, please feel free to get in touch with us at Eardrum. You can email info@eardrum.com.au. Thanks for listening.